No, I'm here. Yes, we have most folks in, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we do want to make this presentation interactive. So if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll have multiple points throughout the presentation that we'll stop and take questions. If you would like to ask questions anonymously, you can drop them in the Q&A and we can answer them. We do have a number of both DOLA staff and then the consultant team, which I am from, will be answering questions throughout the presentation out loud. So we'll type out some responses and then we'll also answer questions out loud. We are recording this presentation and we'll post it later along with the slide deck. I think that is everything. Jen, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, thank you very much, Melissa. All right, so as a way of introductions, my name is Jen Gardner from Logan Simpson. Melissa Ruth is also from Logan Simpson, who kind of brought us into this meeting, and she'll be facilitating the Q&A throughout the process. We also have Sarah McLean from Western Spaces. The three of us make up the consultant team that was hired to help DOLA facilitate these series of webinars to help you all, our local government entities, better understand Proposition 123. We also have on the phone today Robin DeFalco from DOLA. We have Mo Miskell and Connor Everson from the Division of Housing. We have Jerry Lynn Francis from CHAFA. We may have Hillary Cooper from OEDIT. I can't remember if I saw her log on or not. And then we welcome very much, very, very grateful to welcome MJ Adams from the town of Erie, who will give us a little rundown of their experience filing a commitment. So we thank all of you who are on the phone today. I see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names, folks I've worked with over the years, and it's kind of exciting to be in this position and be able to kind of walk you all through Proposition 123. So without further ado, I'll go over the agenda. So we're going to do a brief overview of the Proposition 123, kind of how it came about and the dedicated funding sources. And then I'm going to kick it over to Sarah and Connor and MJ to go through some information on developing your baseline and filing your commitment, compliance, and then some additional resources. And as Melissa said, we have several opportunities throughout this where we'll pause and ask for questions. Feel free to type into the chat and the Q&A in the meantime while we're presenting. So just wanted to go over kind of the key players in this whole program. Really, the first key player is you, our local governments. Without you, we would have no way to push this funding out and actually make use of it. I just wanted to kind of go through all the different departments and divisions that are a part of this program. So as we start to speak the acronyms, you have them in the back of your mind. And I know we mostly know all of these, but just as kind of a reminder. So DOLA is our Department of Local Affairs, and under the DOLA umbrella is the Division of Housing, which is DOH, and the Division of Local Government, which is DLG. Then we have OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and CHAFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. So you'll hear us using those terms throughout the presentation. So now I'm going to go into an overview and a little bit of a breakdown of the dedicated funding. So what is Proposition 123? I know most of you probably remember that we all passed as Colorado voters this proposition in 2022. It was established as the State Affordable Housing Fund. And it draws revenue from our federal taxable income. It's 1/10 of 1% of our federal taxable income. And what the purpose of this funding is to provide an opportunity to access dedicated and sustainable funding for affordable housing projects and initiatives. We're going to go over today kind of what those funding sources look like and kind of what the programs look like in a little bit more detail to try to help understand the programs available. And this is not only available to the local governments. So whereas it is the local governments, your municipalities, counties, and tribal governments that file the initial commitment, it unlocks funding to both the government entities as well as for-profit, nonprofit developers and housing authorities, and nonprofit agencies and other third-party agencies with regards to housing and development of housing. So it's that unlocking that opportunity that helps out and benefits the entire community. So we've said the word commitment several times, and I know many of you are on the phone to understand better how to file your commitments. What that commitment is the proposition, the initial legal language of the proposition set out a requirement to commit to 3% increase in affordable housing annually over a 3-year time period. So each commitment is a 3-year time period. We'll go into that in a little more detail here in a little bit. But I just wanted to highlight that 34 of our local Colorado communities have already filed commitments successfully. You can see them on the screen now. We've got everything from some of the largest municipalities of City and County of Denver and Colorado Springs to some of the smaller urban areas such as yourselves. We're looking at City of Salida, Durango, Fruita, Sheridan, and Silt. And as I said earlier, the town of Erie, MJ is here to kind of go over their experience with the commitment. We also have some data and information from the city of Sheridan that we can share with you to help kind of understand how they worked through their commitment as well. We've got rural resort communities such as Frisco, Hayden, Ridgeway, Silverthorne. Several counties have filed commitments: Boulder County, Saguache County, Chaffee County, and Gunnison County. And then we have a few of our rural communities: Rangeley, Craig, Paonia, and Glenwood Springs have all filed commitments. So I want to go over a little bit how the funding works. So these numbers say the June 2023 forecast. Well, for the first fiscal year, the numbers are actually in. So that's a realistic number of 160 million that we have available here in this first year of funding. And that started January 1st of 2023 and went from January 1st to June 30th. Each of these fiscal years is based on a July to June fiscal year. We're anticipating about 318 million in the second fiscal year. The reason obviously that the first fiscal year is a little less is it was a half a year based on the program starting in January. And then this funding breaks down into several different pools. So we've got two main pools of funding. OEDIT receives 60% of those funds for affordable housing financing. And the Division of Housing receives 40% of these funds for affordable housing support. You can see the numbers below, which just relate to the percentages of those funds and estimated funds. And then we have these programs within those funding sources. So on the OEDIT CHAPA side, which they receive 60% of that pool of funding, we have a land banking program, an equity program, and a concessionary debt program. We have Jerry Lynn Francis from OEDIT or from CHAPA, who's going to go over those programs in a little bit more detail here in just a second. On the DOLA side, the 40% funding that's managed by DOLA goes through the Division of Housing and Division of Local Government to support an affordable home ownership program, a homelessness program, and the local planning capacity development program. So this is just another way to kind of see how those programs work together. And I know we all kind of think about these in different ways. So we wanted to present this in a way that kind of pulled it all together. So you've got at the base of this tree, the roots are the community support. So if you have community support for affordable housing, that filters up through the trunk, which is the local government commitment. And that commitment is what unlocks these programs that are offered by OEDIT, CHAFA, and DOLA. And then ultimately, those programs feed back down into the community to support the housing efforts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the DOLA portion of the funding and how that 40% actually breaks down. So 50% of the DOLA portion of the funds goes to the Affordable Home Ownership Program. That provides down payment assistance to first-time home buyers and grants and loans to nonprofits and community land trusts to support affordable home ownership, as well as mobile homeowners to assist with the purchase of their mobile home park. 45% of the DOLA pool of funding goes to programs servicing persons experiencing homelessness. And that is a tongue twister, but we all get through it eventually. So that provides persons experiencing homelessness or at risk of rental assistance, housing vouchers, and eviction defense assistance, which includes legal, financial, and case management. It also provides grants and loans to nonprofits, local governments, and private entities who are helping in the development and preservation of supportive housing and other homelessness-related activities as determined by the Division of Housing. The last 5% of the funding that is associated with the DOLA pool of funding, that 40%, goes to the local planning capacity grants. And these grants are there to support governments to increase capacity of local government planning departments responsible for processing land use, permitting, and zoning applications for housing projects. It can help with fast track and other streamlining development of processes, systems, and technologies. It can help with land use code amendments and effectively streamlining development review processes. It can help with staff or contractor assistance to review affordable housing applications. And once your first commitment is filed, it can help with future commitment development. So now I'm going to pass it over to Jerry Lynn to talk about the CHAFA and OEDIT portions of the funding source.
Well, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here with everybody on this webinar. Good to see so many familiar faces and also new faces. My name is Jerry Lynn Francis. I am the Chief Communications and Community Partnerships Officer for CHAFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. CHAFA has been selected by OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development, to serve as their contract administrator for the 60% of Prop 123 funds under their management. And the measure gives us really clear guidance on the programs that we can create using those 60% of funds. And those are the three programs you see here on the screen and then that were mentioned a little bit earlier. So those include the land banking program, an equity program, and a concessionary debt program. So let's talk about those three programs just a little bit deeper. The land banking program is designed to be a grant program or a program that offers forgivable loans to help local governments or eligible nonprofits acquire land for the purpose of securing it and then developing affordable housing on that land at a future date. So the grants are available to eligible local governments or tribal governments, including public housing authorities. And then the loans are available to eligible nonprofits with experience providing affordable housing. Those loans for nonprofits can be forgiven if certain performance metrics are met within the statutorily defined 5 and 10-year time frame. So again, those loans can be forgiven if certain performance metrics are met by that nonprofit. The affordable housing that can be built on the land that is banked can be either for rent or for sale. And I'm going to go into some of those household AMIs that need to be supported with this on the next slide. But just know that really the affordable housing built using land banking program can be either for rent or for sale. The second program I want to share a little bit more about is the equity program. And the equity program was created within Prop 123 to provide below market equity to help support the development of low and middle income affordable rental housing. So multifamily housing serving low or middle income populations. And the equity is designed to help offset the costs of providing or constructing that particular housing stock. The exciting piece about the equity program is that it also is designed to be used in conjunction with a tenant equity vehicle. So residents who reside at properties supported with the Prop 123 equity program, if they reside there for a year or more, they get to participate in a tenant equity vehicle to help them either build up their savings for down payment assistance or just general savings over time. That's a really exciting and innovative feature of the Prop 123 equity program. The third and final program that we're allowed to create within the Affordable Housing Financing Fund is the concessionary debt program. And concessionary debt program is really just to provide your typical debt financing, again, to support low and middle income affordable rental housing. So multifamily developments serving low or middle income Coloradans. We can finance 4 different kinds of eligible uses using concessionary debt. So the first 2 are either new construction or preservation of lower middle income multifamily housing. The next one, the third eligible use, is pre-development funding or gap financing for low income housing tax credit eligible projects. And then the fourth and final eligible use within the concessionary debt program is to support financing for modular or factory build manufacturers, so the actual manufacturing business themselves. So those are really exciting and innovative deployments in our concessionary debt. Let me tell you just really quickly a little bit about our timeline for rollout. So we've already opened up LOIs for the land banking program. We are currently accepting those through August 21st, so next week. That land banking form is available on the website that was just shared in the chat, Colorado Affordable Housing Financing Fund.com, and you can see it there on the screen. All the program information about all 3 of these is on that website, by the way. The second program that we're working to roll out, I guess I got my words backwards there, working to roll out, is the concessionary debt program. And we expect to open that later in September, so stay tuned for more details on the availability of those resources. The third program and the last program that we know will roll out will be the equity program. So that one will probably roll out towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. Again, want to reinforce that website, Colorado Affordable Housing Financing Fund.com. All the details I just shared and much more are available on that website, as is the form for submitting an LOI for land banking. We've also held several webinars and engagement sessions just like this for the different programs. And so if you want to take a deeper dive into any of those, feel free to listen to those webinars on that are posted on that website. I'll be here for the remainder of the webinar if there are any more questions. But really quickly, before I pass it over, let's go to the next slide, and I'll just show you some highlights on the AMI of households that we will be serving with these 3 different programs. So this is going to give you a chart of all the different AMIs served through all the different programs. I'm going to call out the 3 that we are administering for OEdit under the Affordable Housing Financing Fund. So you can see there, if you're using the land banking program, households that would be rental households being served would have to earn less than 60% of AMI, so 60% AMI and below. If you're going to support homeownership on that land banking site, households have to earn 100% of AMI or below. Okay, so 60% for rental, 100% for homeownership under land banking. Under the equity program, households supported have to earn an average of 90% AMI or below. So the average can't exceed 90% AMI. You can have units that are less than 90 or above 90, but when you take all those units together and average the AMI out, it can't exceed 90% AMI, okay? And then for concessionary debt, it's 60% AMI or below as an average. So again, an average AMI, you can have some that earn less, some that earn more, but when you look at all the units at that particular property supported with Prop 123 funds, they cannot exceed an average of 60% AMI. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it back to the team so they can talk through the AMIs for the DOH programs.
Thank you, Jerry Lynn. So yeah, for the Division of Housing program, the AMIs are listed for the Affordable Homeownership Program. So the grants and loans and the mobile home park portion require a 100% AMI range. And then the down payment assistance is up to 120% AMI. So we're targeting the 100 and 120% AMI with those affordable home ownership programs. So as you can see from this table, we're targeting a variety of programs from the 60% to 120% AMI, not just that lower income that we see a lot of times for affordable housing, but we're trying to inch that up a little bit more to some higher AMIs to provide housing for those gaps in there. All right, I'm going to pause here for a minute to answer any questions. I think we're doing okay on time. So Melissa, if you've seen any questions come through the chat that you think would be worthy of bringing forward, we can do that first, and then we'll take any questions from folks.
There are no questions in the chat, but we did have one Q&A that asked, what are the population ranges between large municipalities and small urban areas? Large cities are 25,000 population or greater, and small urban areas are those between 5,000 and 25,000. We drew this line simply to group different jurisdictions by size, but there is no formal classification in Prop 123 that corresponds to this. That's an important distinction. The slide a couple slides back that had the different communities that have set their or have filed and had their commitments accepted, those groupings are more for us than a requirement by Prop 123. And then we do have another question in the chat or in the Q&A that asks, can you please talk a little bit about project readiness or project status for an LOI for land banking? How conceptual or how far along should these projects be? Jerry Lynn, do you want to answer this one?
Sure, happy to speak to it. So if you are interested in submitting an LOI, the form that we have you complete does ask for a description, including property location. And when we're considering applications, particularly if it's going to be a competitive awarded process, and by the way, that's still a determination to be made. Part of the reason that we're going through an LOI process is because we want to really understand what the demand for this program is this first year out. And so this LOI process is going to help us get a feel for how many folks are really seeking these funds. If we have more applications than we think we'll be able to award, we may have to use a competitive application process. And I will tell you that readiness to proceed is a huge area of interest and need for us as we are going to be evaluating applications. And that'll be true either way, whether it's a competitive or a non-competitive process, but particularly in a competitive process, readiness to proceed is going to be a huge factor. We all know in Colorado that we need units now. We need units today. We needed them yesterday, right? So even though this is land banking, and we know that the intention is to secure land for future development, those applications that are more fully fleshed out, really have that site, top of mind, that readiness to proceed is going to be a huge area of interest for us. Now, I will also say, though, in that vein, new units is the goal. So we have also been asked the question, hey, I've got a deal that's already underway. can I just apply for this land banking money so that I can offset the land costs in my development that's already 3/4 of the way done? And that also is not going to be as competitive, because again, those units are already planned. They're already well underway. They're not necessarily bringing newer units that hadn't been contemplated yet to the table. So want to just give you a little bit of perspective and clarity from both sides of that question. And thank you for that question. So it's a good one. Hope that was helpful.
Great. Thank you, Jerry Lynn. Do we have any other questions at this point?
I did see there's one in the chat. Looks like it might have come directly to me initially. Can you speak more about the resort exception on the top of the previous slide? So Jerry Lynn, that was at the top of your slide about the resort exception. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure, that's a great question as well. And I should have highlighted that. If we can go back to the last slide, that would be okay, just so folks are familiar with what the question is about.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Hi, thank you. So
I am good, thank you.
Oh, I think we have someone who should maybe be on mute. Okay, very good. Thanks so much, everyone. The question about the resorts, and that's a good one. Unless rural resort petition is approved, that's what the question is about on this side. So this past legislative session, House Bill 1304 created the opportunity for rural resort communities to petition the Colorado Division of Housing to use higher AMIs than what the Prop 123 statute defined. So for those particular rural resort communities, they can petition the Colorado Division of Housing to use AMIs that are distinct from what we're showing here on this chart if they feel like that's what they need in order to be able to meet their community needs. Was that helpful to the question?
That is helpful. And maybe Jerry Lynn, can you expand on that a little bit more? Is there a process or some sort of justification that they would need to?
They will need to go to a justification process. I think we have our friends from DOH on the call, and so I'd invite them to speak more to that. I believe that process is still being developed and to be rolled out, but if there's anyone from Division of Housing who'd like to speak specifically to that, certainly welcome that.
Thanks, Jerry Lynn. That's exactly right. Connor Everson with the Division of Housing, and there is not yet a process for a petition to be submitted for the traffic programs. That's expected to be released in September. Localities may only currently petition to be reclassified as a rural resort area. I'll put the link for that form in the chat here.
Thanks, Connor. I might just add one piece. If anyone's interested in submitting an LOI to us for the land banking program, but you're a rural resort community who's intending to apply for AMI variance, we just ask that you note that in the LOI form. Certainly that doesn't need to be completed at this point in the process. At the LOI point in the process, we would look for that to be more firmed up at the application point, but you can just let us know that in the narrative. Thanks for all the good questions.
We did just get a couple more questions in the chat. One is, will property acquisition or construction be eligible activities within the DOLA affordable home ownership and homelessness prevention programs? And maybe Mo or Robin, would you be able to answer that question? Or Connor? Will property acquisition or construction be eligible activities within the affordable home ownership and homelessness prevention programs?
Yeah, sorry, this is Mo. I was struggling to unmute myself and get my camera back on. Yes, under the home ownership program, there are a variety of sub-programs within it, and acquisition and property acquisition and construction are definitely eligible for that as well. Prop 123 funds on our end of things are being rolled into existing programs, and those programs are already in existence in our framework, and Prop 123 funds will just be added to the other funds we have available for those programs. For this cycle, we may go into new programs in the future, but for now, it's being rolled into what our bread and butter is, and that on what is already in existence, and you should be all familiar with, hopefully. And then if you want more information about that, I'd be more than happy to connect you to our folks with the Office of Housing, Finance, and Sustainability as well. Was there a question about homelessness too, or is it just, oh, and then homelessness prevention programs, correct. So I think Jen went over this earlier. So there's really two programs within our bucket of Prop 123 funds, if you will. So our 40%, 50% is going to home ownership, which the property acquisition and construction would be eligible activities under. And then 45% of our 40% would go towards our homelessness programs. And there are a variety of different programs that would be eligible under that. But if you need more specifics, we'd be happy to have that conversation with you offline if you'd like.
And Mo, maybe you can stay on for another minute. There's a question about why the arbitrary limit of 3% per year and 9% over 3 years. I believe that was established before through the proposition, but maybe Mo, do you have any background on that?
Yeah, we didn't write the proposition, of course. That was a ballot initiative. Gary Community Investments was the main proponent, as well as several other interested parties. I would encourage you to have the conversation with them about how they land on those numbers. But obviously they put some thought into it, and they tried to thread the needle as best as they could from what we can tell. But of course, it's not a one size fits all. But unfortunately, for some jurisdictions, it is laid out that way. As far as the legislators themselves, the legislatures, themselves, they are aware of this issue that, and really it's not even a small versus large community necessarily. It's really any community that has a lot of affordable housing already. By having a 3% across the board, those that already have a large number of affordable housing units are being asked to grow even more compared to a community, whether small or large, who has a small number of affordable housing units. So that has been something that's been highlighted since November. But as Jerry Lynn mentioned, when 1304, House Bill 23-1304 was considered this past legislative session, they wanted to make sure that they were honoring what the voters had just voted on as much as possible. So our session was just January through May, and this ballot initiative was voted on by the voters in November. So to drastically change the will of the people, so to speak, in such a short time frame was not something that our legislative body was interested in doing at this time. And of course, we're just in year one of this whole grand experiment, if you will, to increase affordable housing, badly needed affordable housing in our state. So I'm guessing they're going to see how this works out over the next couple of years before making any major changes. With that being said, though, nothing prevents you from having those conversations with your legislators and coming up with perhaps a different framework that would make more sense and differentiating between small and large, or as I touched upon, really differentiating between those that already have a lot of affordable housing from those that might need more than the 3%. So something for you to think about. That opportunity for you exists. We're the executive branch. We don't write the laws. We're here to implement them as best as possible with your help.
Great. Thanks, Mo, for that. One more question, and then we'll move on to the next portion of our presentation. But the next question is, if funding will be rolled into existing programs, will the entirety of those grant programs now limit applications to only those communities that have opted into Proposition 123? I believe the answer is no, but we might have to read that one more time.
Yeah, I was trying to make sense of the question myself. only the Prop 123 funds require a commitment, and not all the funds. Prop 123 funds, that is, the homeownership funds for sure. If for example, someone applied to, an eligible entity applied to one of our homeownership programs, and there's an opportunity for Prop 123 funds to be made available, that would require a local jurisdiction commitment, right? But a commitment is not required for the other funds that DOH might be considering in order to award to that applicant, if that makes sense, right? So we have a variety of different funding pools we can pull from in order to make awards under our homeownership programs, right? The Prop 123 funds could not be exercised without a local government commitment. The rest could. They're completely separate, okay? On the homelessness side of things, if the money is following people, right, versus resulting in an affordable housing project, in other words, development of some sort, that doesn't require a commitment at all for Prop 123. But if any of that money is going towards development, or there's an interest in some of the funds going towards development, then that would require a local government commitment. Does that make sense? Let me know if I need to address that differently.
Nope, I think that sounds good, Mo. Thank you so much for replying to those. I think we'll go ahead and move on. We can circle back to some additional questions as we get through this next phase of the presentation. So
Thank you,
Sarah,
Jen.
yeah.
And thank you all for your great questions. So now you have a little bit of an understanding of what the funding programs are. So the next step is to think about if you want to opt in and file a commitment and unlock those funds. So we're going to give a brief description of how you establish your baseline. On this next slide, we've created sort of a graphic, make it look like it's going to be really fun. And I think it will be. So the first step is to decide on what median income you're going to use. There's the area median income, the median family income, and the state median income. And there are some tools available to sort of look at how those change your baseline number. But for now, we're going to list those as options. The next step is number 2, to decide how you're going to look at your household distribution, which is where your households fall in that income range. And you can use HUD-CHAS data or American Community Survey data. So once you've made those 2 choices, then you can understand where all of your households are on the full spectrum. And then from that, you're going to want to look at the households that are in affordable units. An affordable unit is defined as no more than 30% of monthly household income toward housing payment. For ownership units, the limit is 100% AMI, and for rental units, it's 60% AMI. So all those households that are making an affordable payment under 100% AMI for ownership and 60% AMI for rental then become your baseline. And from your baseline, you can go ahead and file a commitment, which is to increase that baseline by 9% in 3 years. Now we have a little stoplight here if you have any quick questions. All right, I'll go ahead to the next slide. So once you have your baseline, you're going to want to look towards filing your commitment. The objective is to increase affordable housing by 3% annually or 9% over 3 years. And that's going to include new housing, and that's when the housing is permitted, not when there's a certificate of occupancy. And then existing housing that is converted from market rate to affordable with some mechanism to preserve affordability, such as a deed restriction or a land use restrictive agreement. And so number 1 in the graphic below, baseline calculation. Number 2, commitment filing. As soon as that commitment filing is filed and accepted, you can begin counting towards your goal. And the next slide gives you sort of another graphic that helps you visualize the process. So in the gray here, if you file early before November 1st, you can start counting towards your goal once it's accepted. There's a 3-year commitment. If you do not file this year in November and decide to file next year, you can file for a 2-year commitment, or following that in 2025 for a 1-year commitment. And in 2026, you will start again with establishing a new baseline and thinking if you would like to file another commitment. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Connor, who's going to walk you through a couple tools for looking at these numbers.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we do have a question in the chat for the stoplight as well. So Helen West wrote, can we use a recent housing needs assessment to determine the household distribution, or does it have to come from the ACS or HUD? And the answer to that is that it does have to come from the ACS or HUD. It's a statutory requirement that the baseline the community determines references those specific data sets. And that is the reason, that statutory requirement, why the state has been putting together some reference materials for localities to help them in their commitment filings and their baseline determinations. So it is absolutely allowable for a locality to file a baseline, file a commitment with a baseline that they have determined themselves, running their own numbers. But that isn't something that we've seen yet. We've seen folks using 2 different resources that we've created here at the state. And the first is our baseline reference data table. That's something that we created back in the spring or the winter. And we're mostly seeing smaller municipalities and rural counties make use of that source. The reason for that is this was an initial tabulation of potential baselines that we thought would be a good starting place. And we heard from many large municipalities, more urban areas, that it wasn't flexible enough, that the baseline was too high. And that is one reason we've seen those areas using a different resource. But since this is a group of smaller communities, we do want to flag this table as a good starting place. Because if you are a smaller municipality, you may have an option on this table that works for you and requires very little additional effort and time. But we do have other options available as well. We have our baseline assistance tool, which is more interactive. It lets folks pick not just your location and your income limit, but also adjust for the largest issues that we had with that original spreadsheet. You can adjust for price increases since the census data was collected using inflation adjustment. And you can also fine tune the portion of your ownership housing stock that is included in the baseline. So a lot more opportunity for fine tuning. And this is something that we are still updating when we get the chance. As of about an hour ago, we included the 2 tribes of Colorado in the baseline assistance tool. And that's completely new because of the statutory changes. So it's very stable, and changes are a little small, but definitely let us know what ideas and thoughts you all have for additional features in the future. I'll throw my email in the chat here towards the end of my part of this presentation. And something to know when you're looking at the baseline assistance tool is that you'll have the option, oh, no, we can go back to that slide about the income limits. So whether you're looking at that baseline assistance tool or the spreadsheet, you may select either your own area median income or an alternative income limit. Now, I just want to reiterate that there are some things in statute to which there is no alternative. There is no alternative to the ACS data or to the HUD data. There is also no alternative to the definitions of affordable housing and what is to be included in the baseline. But you may have more flexibility with your baseline if you use an income limit from a neighboring county or by using the state household median income. And we've seen some localities using this to great success. And it also does require some minor additional justification in the commitment filing. But the municipalities that have been making use of this have given us, just a few sentences, a paragraph to walk us through their logic. And we'll go through that in just a minute here. So in order to file your commitment, we have an online form system linked here. It has about 3 different sections, and we've heard from many localities that it can take as little as 15 minutes to complete. And that, that determination of the baseline can take a decent amount of time, but as far as filling out the commitment is really quite quick and can look different for each locality. And today we're going to be walking through the commitment filing for the city of Sheridan within the Denver metro area. They had a very solid filing, and they agreed to kind of share it with you here. Well, we'll be sharing it on their behalf. So this is the first page of the commitment filing. And there's some very straightforward information to fill in about the name of your locality and that baseline amount that you obtained either from those 2 state-provided resources or your own numbers if you chose to run them and they comply with statute. So this baseline amount is quite important. It's what we are going to keep on record for that annual goal and looking at compliance at the end of the day. And after that, we have an area for folks to start kind of showing us how is it that they kind of came to their baseline amount. Just to walk us through their logic, and this section can look pretty different for each locality. The information that we'll be looking for does depend on the resources that they cite and those policy flexibilities that they choose. So you'll see that the city of Sheridan used the area median income for their own county, Arapahoe County. This means that no additional discussion is required for an alternative income limit. So it's definitely less work for the locality if they keep it simple using their own area median income. And the next thing that we have folks do is discuss the methods that they used to determine that baseline. And for Sheridan, you can see that their response was fairly brief, but it worked for us. The reason why it worked is Sheridan cited the spreadsheet. So we were able to grab their baseline number on one screen and look at the spreadsheet on another, and it completely matches up. And that's all that's needed for that type of compliance determination when we're doing that review. And the last part of the commitment is an optional narrative on some statutory priorities created by the proposition. So there's some priorities like increasing density, furthering environmental sustainability, and the deconcentration of affordable housing. So that is not something that needs to be within an ordinance or a resolution in any way, but it is something that the statute mentions. So we have it as an optional place here. If your locality is not prioritizing those priorities, a commitment can still be filed. You could even leave that section blank. And the last part of this is a review area that folks, can we advance it one more slide? Thank you. So this is the review area where it just kind of gets everyone on the same page of what that 3-year goal and annual goal is in addition to the baseline. And it's really just helping us see how everything fits together. And the things that we want to flag for everyone about this particular filing as you consider your own is that we liked it for several reasons. It had the correct administrative information, the proper name of the locality. Sometimes we see that the annual goal is entered in that second box at the very beginning instead of the baseline. So we check for that completeness when we're doing a review first, and then we dovetail into compliance. And we know that if a commitment contains a baseline that is determined using the state-provided resources, that it will likely be compliant with statute because it meets those definitions of affordable housing and of the required data source references as well. And we were able to completely draw those lines back within the Sheridan filing because of the information that they provided to us on where they got their information and how we kind of traced it back to our own resources. So some localities definitely go to a larger extent of detail. Often if they're using the baseline assistance tool, they'll provide some bullets on the choices that they made to model their housing situation and how they arrived at those choices. So sometimes it might be as long as a few paragraphs, but really this is fairly brief as far as administrative filings go. And I think that is the end of my section here.
Hey, Connor, do you mind addressing the last question in the chat from Randy Sneap?
I'll do that, yeah. So the chat from Randy reads, hey team, what is the situation in which cities and counties should be considering adjusting the data in the baseline assistance tool? So I think, Randy, feel free to pipe up here. When you say adjusting, are you thinking about the alternative income limits that localities can choose? Is that what you have in mind?
Hey, Connor. So this question has just been popping up a lot, is kind of, smaller jurisdictions are going through just using the baseline tool and it's spitting out something. And then I think there's just some hesitation around like, is this the right number for my entity, or should I be sort of tweaking it, and what situations should they be considering that? Is it just if like the number that it spits out seems really not very practical for their area, or when should they do that, and when should they just use the table that we've put out?
Thanks, Randy. That's quite helpful. When folks are using the baseline assistance tool, the starting place that we recommend is to use an income limit for the most recent year of 2022. Because we've seen most localities trying to model their current housing situation instead of the situation in the past, just because the prices and affordability have gotten worse. That is where it gets a little bit tricky, Randy, where there's those additional choices of what's the inflation that my locality has experienced, and what portion of our for sale stock do we expect to be listed over the next few years. And that's where we do not have that information at the state for the local level, but we've seen many smaller jurisdictions getting that information from federal agencies like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Federal Reserve Bank. And we have seen that working out quite well for them. So I think that's a good starting place, is trying to model that current situation of your community, and especially those changes with inflation over the past roughly 4 years since 2019. And in addition to that, if you come up with a baseline with those choices that doesn't seem realistic, that's where we would recommend starting to look at those alternative income limits. So that AMI of a neighboring county, or that state median household income. There's many folks that we've been talking with where the baseline they get initially with their own AMI is just unrealistic because their income within their own city is different from their county. So there's a discrepancy there. And we've seen many cities argue and just provide some brief justification that because there's that discrepancy, they're going to use their neighbors or the state's median income. So that would be the next step that we recommend, and to find that justification that accurately reflects the workforce and housing needs of your own locality. And I see that another question is in the chat here, and it reads, if a municipality chooses ONAMI from the baseline reference table, how can we determine that the actual AMI to use, how can we determine the actual AMI used to calculate the annual and 3-year target? Well, I guess the short answer is you could take our word for it. We used the 2022 income limits from HUD in the baseline assistance tool in that reference table. Localities are also welcome to go through our code used to produce that information. It's available publicly, but it's quite lengthy and wonky. But it is 2022 for all the localities in that spreadsheet.
Thanks, Connor. We have a few more questions from earlier that I want to read the answers aloud to. We had one from Mark During that asked is the funding to communities given every year for 3 years, or is it given in year 3? The response is that these Prop 123 funds are not an allocation to local jurisdictions. Each funding program distributes funds differently and all require an application process. Keep in mind that the local government commitment is required in order to unlock access to funds for projects in that jurisdiction. If the local government doesn't opt in, potential projects in that jurisdiction would not be eligible for Prop 123 funding. And then one more that asked, what is the state's position on using alternative baseline calculations from adjoining counties that are not in Colorado or for counties adjacent to the state line? The response is that the law allows for the use of an AMI of a county from another state as long as it is an adjacent jurisdiction. And then we dropped an example of that in the chat. So there's an example or a response that says you'll see examples of this in our baseline data table. Are there any other questions at this point? I think we'll hand it to Erie.
Just real quick before we do that, Melissa, I believe Robin had something that she wanted to share regarding Sheridan before we switch to Erie.
Oh yes, go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm with Division of Local Government, and I just wanted to clarify that Andrew from Sheridan had given permission for us to share his example. And part of the process that many of you are going through is about the numbers. And the other part of the process is just kind of navigating your own jurisdiction's process. So we've been asked a lot about whether or not you need a resolution. Does City Council or your BOCC need to vote on this? The answer is no. There's nothing formal in statute that requires that. If your own city's process is, if it's appropriate to do a resolution, that is up to you, and you may. And there is a way for you to attach that, include that as an attachment when you file your commitment. So in the case of Sheridan, Andrew just shared that they were eager to get their commitment filed early because they had a big project that was getting ready to be permitted, and they wanted to be able to count those units early. So by filing a little early, I believe it was in June, they were able to count those new units. And so any of you also have that opportunity, as we showed on the slides earlier. Andrew also shared that the council wasn't that involved. They didn't have a big process around this. The mayor was definitely very engaged and involved in affordable housing efforts in general. And so once they worked through those baseline numbers and established what their commitment would be, it was a fairly simple and straightforward process to file their commitment. So I just wanted to share that anecdote as well. And now I would be happy to hand it off to Town of Erie to share their experience.
Hi, I'm MJ Adams. I'm the Affordable Housing Manager for the Town of Erie. And I'll share with you that I sort of had the blessing and the curse of arriving here from out of state to start work in April. There's a part of me, I was at a meeting last week and someone said, who who wasn't here in November 2022, and I got to raise my hand. I think I was the only one in the room who wasn't here. But when I came in, I was tasked very quickly with taking a look at this Proposition 123 thing we had to pay attention to, and some other things that were in the works. But I also need to say that I really stand on the shoulders of the folks who were here in Erie before me and the leadership of the local municipality, both the mayor and the trustees, the town manager, who are very, very much committed to making sure that we're addressing affordable housing, and especially as it plays in as a workforce and economic development issue, because if there's no housing for workers to live in, there's no economic activity. And so you can't have one without the other. So when I arrived in April, I was, like I said, tasked with figuring out this Proposition 123 and what we needed to do. The things I had heard was, number one, we have to increase something 3% a year. Number two, you have to do fast track permitting. And number three, you got to get this done before July 1st. And I was like, wow, okay. So I started to research as much as I could, and I started talking with my colleagues. And Erie is north of Denver and a member of the Boulder County Regional Housing Partnership, which is a regional partnership that really recognizes that housing is really a regional market and not municipality by municipality. And so I had the benefit of working with people who had been working on affordable housing for quite a long time. And they were spending a lot of time sort of crunching numbers and trying to figure out how it worked, especially since they already had a lot of housing, affordable housing in their community. And I was the sort of the new kid on the block who had, a community that had a lot of housing, a lot of new housing, but didn't have a lot of affordable housing. So in looking at the numbers, as I was sorting through what we needed to do, I will add that I have the added adventure that Erie is split between Boulder County and Weld County, and those income numbers are somewhat different. So as I was trying to sort all this out, I actually took advantage of every opportunity I could to watch somebody from DOLA or Department of Housing talk about Proposition 123. And then I heard tell of this baseline tool that was being developed by the staff there. And so in looking at the tables they had presented, we could have worked with that, but I was very interested in seeing and getting a better understanding on how the state was thinking about how we were calculating this number. And I'll say that because I come from a state where we had a subsidized housing inventory, and every year, every town got measured in terms of how much affordable housing they had as a percentage of their housing stock. And that was an important number for funding decisions and for allocations, and also for some regulatory and permitting processes that happen. So I came out of an environment, and people have heard me say this, is that which is measured gets done. And so this goal of starting a 3% of our affordables increase every year said, well, we have to figure out where we're starting from and what we're measuring. So I had, the opportunity of meeting with Connor one-on-one to talk through Erie's specific situations. We decided to go with the Boulder County AMI as the income level that we would use, largely because we're in a partnership relationship with the Boulder County folks and are looking to have some collaboration in terms of managing programs together up here. And my other message is, keep it simple so that people understand it. So it didn't make sense for Erie to try to come up with its own income number. It made sense for us to work with our partners and be aligned to really reduce the confusions, and so that we were all sort of singing off the same sheet in terms of, what's affordable housing and what's the income that you need to qualify for affordable housing up in this area. The Boulder County AMI is the one that we decided to use. What I was pleased to find out fairly quickly is that the fast track permitting wasn't required for this initial filing, although we were well underway to be working on that and actually did pass fast track here in Erie at the end of July. But we had decided that we wanted to get our commitment letter in before the end of June, because I heard that there was funding sources that opened up on July 1st. So in my mind, that was a deadline that needed to get met. So we did submit it at the very end of June. And it was a very simple, straightforward process. The way we did it locally is, as I said, that the town manager, the mayor, the board of trustees have all been very supportive of wanting to put their shoulder behind the wheel in doing something about affordable housing. We had just completed our housing needs assessment. Also, thank you, Department of Housing and our DOLA for the grant that funded that housing needs assessment. But we had some recent very good data that showed that it was, affordable housing was really crimping our future, and that we really needed to take a leadership role in wading into the weeds and starting to do something about it. So I arrived in this environment where there was already an awareness that something needed to happen, and they looked to me and to the planning department to say what needed to happen. And so we worked through the process with the tools that we were given, and we came up with our commitment letter. And our process, we had heard that you didn't have to have a resolution, and our leadership was not requesting that. We did do a presentation to our board of trustees in June before we submitted it. We explained the rationale for using the Boulder County AMI numbers. And then we literally sat down once we had everything written and put it into your form and pushed the submit button and then celebrated. Then we learned that our commitment was accepted. I'm a little amused that Erie is considered a large urban area, because we really think of ourselves as more of a small town, and you'll see that we're the only town in that large urban municipality list. We are 34,000. Most of those residents have joined us like in the last 5 years. So we're dealing a lot with growth, and also in the middle of doing our comprehensive plan updates. So there was just a lot of very energetic conversation about housing, growth, planning this spring. So it felt like a very rich environment to be putting together this commitment. And as I stripped it down and looked at it, I was trying to figure out what's the state trying to achieve here. And what I thought was, they need municipalities the leadership of municipalities to pay attention to the housing piece. I will quote a former congressman of mine who says, all politics are local. So this conversation was happening as the state was also talking about this 213 law, which did not pass, but it was this conversation about what's the state role versus what's the municipality role. And I do believe that, all politics are local. That said, I will also make the statement that housing markets are regional. And the fact that Erie was in a regional housing partnership already with the other folks in Boulder County, I think really just gave us the strength to sort of say, yeah, we got to stay focused on this. And we've already made the commitment to try. As part of our participation in the Boulder County Regional Housing Partnership a couple of years ago, the communities that participate in that have committed that by the year 2035, we're all going to try to get to 12% of our housing stock to be affordable. So there's this sort of regional accountability to each other that we all need to do something. The big communities, Boulder, Longmont, Lafayette, they're all doing stuff already. It's time for the smaller communities that are still in this regional housing market to really step up to the plate and to contribute their piece. And as I was looking at the information that was coming out, it seemed like there was no downside to participating. You're asking municipalities to commit. You're asking us to give it a try. You're unlocking some additional funding to communities that raise their hand and say, yeah, we want to do something about it here. But there doesn't seem to be any consequence if we fail to meet that. Not that you shouldn't try to meet, but if there's no harm, no foul if you don't make your 3% a year. Get in there, start committing, start to understand the issues, understand what you need to do at the municipal level, and then do the things that you need to do. The bar is going to be a little higher in 3 years because the fast track piece will be on the table also. And we'll have a better understanding of how we count and how we get and how we produce and support the creation of this housing. So that's the essence of it. We stepped in, like I said, I had the advantage of being new to the state with fresh eyes and not having to grapple with the numbers issues as much. And I've got to publicly thank Connor for helping me understand the baseline tool. But we navigated that, came out with something that was, we think, very comfortable with it. And our goal is, the number is not that high, And so we absolutely intend to overperform as we're doing our commitments. And there's a couple of projects that are already sort of moving through the pipeline that we're pretty confident we'll hit our 3%. Maybe not the first year, but in the subsequent years. And so, I think that the other piece is the fast track. We passed the fast track even though we learned it wasn't required. That was probably, novice mistake from me thinking, oh, with this fast track, we got to get going. But it was already well in the works. There was community support for it. So my goal was to catch the ball and run it over the end line. And I think we were able to do that. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, MJ. We'll look for some questions coming into the chat. Melissa, do you want to monitor these?
Yes, I don't see anything yet, but folks, feel free to drop questions in the chat. Or if you'd like to ask them directly, you can raise your hand. We can call on you.
Well, while you're waiting for that, I'm actually going to do a shameless plug that I'm hiring a housing person. So if you know any professional who wants to hop in and join Erie in our efforts, please direct them immediately to the Town of Erie website for employment opportunities.
Well, we're not seeing any questions coming in. Feel free to just sort of type them as we go. We do have stoplights along the way for stopping for questions. Just as I said that, we did get one in. In the case where a municipality makes the commitment but isn't awarded funding through one of the programs, what happens after the 3-year period if 9% target is not met? Do we have anyone that wants to jump on that?
I can handle that one. It's really a timeout of sorts, if you will. So if at the end of this 3-year period, which would be December 31st of 2026, it becomes apparent that the local jurisdiction that filed the commitment for 9% increase over 3 years did not meet that, whether it be 8% or 7% or whatever number short of 9%. The way the law is constructed, that means the following year, they would not be filing a commitment for increasing their affordable housing, but rather would be sitting out for a year, and therefore funding tied to Prop 123, not other funding, just funding tied specifically Prop 123 would not be available for use in that jurisdiction. So other eligible entities could not apply for Prop 123 to be utilized in your jurisdiction for that 1 year. The good news is you could submit a new commitment the following year, and at that point you'd be establishing a new baseline, and you'd be filing a commitment to increase that baseline over 2 years. So you'd be looking at 6% over 2 years instead of 9% over 3 years, and then you would be working towards that new baseline and that new commitment to increase it by 3% each year for 2 years. So that is the only penalty, if you will, that's established in Proposition 123 as currently laid out. And good to see you again, MJ. Great job. Thank you so much. Colorado's lucky to have you.
Can I also make a comment on, this question about resources? I think that it's easy for us to look at the Proposition 123 resources, but I've got to make the plug that there's a lot of things you can do at the local level to make housing more affordable, to enable the creation of these products and to track them and to just do that locally. It's great to have the state funding, and that's going to be critical. But when we're looking at the income levels that Proposition 123 hit, we're up to 100% of the AMI. And, I think that we have to look to ourselves to figure out, even if there were no state money in there, how do we make it happen in our community?
Well, thank you so much, MJ. And before we move on to the next slide, we're gonna look at some filing takeaways. But I had a few takeaways from what you said, MJ, that I sort of wanted to highlight. One was that which is measured gets done. I thought that was a nice way to state it. Another is keep it simple. And we've heard that from other communities as well. And then I liked when you said push and celebrate. You know, you've done it, great. You know, let's move on. Let's see what we can do with all of this. And then lastly is that housing is regional, right? So you can't cooperate to file your commitment or baseline, but you can use that funding once you have access to it to programs. You can collaborate regionally and with other partners to use that funding in those programs. So the next slide has a few more filing takeaways. It does not take much time to file, and I think MJ echoed that. The most successful localities have a 3-year goal which balances needs, capacity, and reality. The Department of Housing will only ask you to resubmit your filing if it is incomplete or not compliant with statute. So if you're not sure, you think you're ready, don't worry, go ahead and submit it and get the process started. The Department of Housing, only downside of not meeting commitment is you are not eligible for funding in 2027 only. And Mo just gave a really great description of how that works. Funds are for local governments as well as third parties, developers, nonprofits, homeowners, and residents. So unlocking those funds opens them up to all of those other groups. And currently, once a filing is accepted, the community name is published on DOLA's site, but nothing else as far as what you sent is published. In the future, it will also include baseline and commitment numbers. And we do have a stoplight here if we have any questions before we move on.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Sarah.
Okay. And also, if you would like to ask anything via the Q&A option, those are anonymous. So if you would like to do it that way, that works as well. So let's go ahead and move on to compliance and fast track. For compliance, the deadline to meet your 9% increase if you filed this November would be 9%. It's December 31st, 2026. And that includes new housing and existing housing, which would be converted from market rate to affordable. If you fail to achieve your commitment target, you become ineligible for funding in 2027 calendar year only, but you may file a 2-year commitment by November 27 and be eligible for funding again in 2028. This graphic below should look familiar to you. It outlines the process, and we've added towards the end of this the compliance of December 31st, 2026. And shortly prior to that compliance, November 1st, 2026, you will have the option to establish a new baseline and file a new commitment. And by that time, you need to have your fast track approval in place. And I will cover what that is on the next slide. So it's not required for this first iteration, as MJ nicely explained to us as well. But it must be in place for the commitment due November 1st in 2026. And that's to have a process in place to make a final decision on a complete application, which would be a special permit, a variance, or other development permit in 90 calendar days if 50% or more units constitute affordable housing. And this does not apply to subdivisions. There's an option to extend for an additional 90 calendar days at the request of the developer, or for a review period required by another local government or agency where approval is required. And there are also grant extensions for additional information or revisions, 30 days from response or 5 days to respond. And the Department of Local Affairs is working on guidance material to help communities through this process. And those will become available sometime later this fall. So some takeaways from compliance and fast track. Demonstrate 3% increase annually or 9% over 3 years. Fast track is not required until 2026, November. Conversion of units also counts towards your commitment. Loss of existing affordable units does not affect meeting your commitment. New units count toward commitment at building permit. They do not have to have a certificate of occupancy by the end of 3 years. You can start counting units produced as soon as your filing is accepted. So if you get it in prior to November 1 and it is accepted, then you can start counting units produced. You can develop regional partnerships if multiple jurisdictions build housing jointly. And we do have a stoplight here. Do we have questions in the chat, Melissa?
We have one clarification from Connor. So he said that with the DOLA filings, DOLA is able to look at commitment filing drafts before they are submitted if it helps your board or council process and reduce the risk of backtrack. So just a clarification, DOLA is able to look at those filings if you are taking the filing to the board or council for resolution, or the board wants to approve it before you submit. And then we do have a question that from Mark Doring that says, is the 90 days for a rezoning to PUD before a subdivision and include meeting the 30-day notice period for mineral rights owners?
Mark, are you willing to elaborate on this question? I'll be honest with you, I don't quite follow it, but maybe somebody else does. Any chance you'd be willing to unmute and add a little bit more clarity to help guide us, Mark? If not, I'd be more than, I can provide my email address in the chat, and perhaps you and I can connect offline to have a more detailed discussion. I'll do that right now.
Maybe if I could just add that the fast track guidance that we'll be working on this fall is partly a stakeholder engagement process to really figure out what that looks like. What does fast track look like for different types of jurisdictions? Where does the clock start and stop? Those kinds of questions are really still to be determined. The statute provides some general guidelines, but we're not quite prepared to answer all of those questions yet. And that's mercifully why it's not part of why it's not due until 2026. So there is still time to get better understanding on that.
Thanks, Robin. I don't see, oh, there is a question in the chat, yes, or in the Q&A that asks, will the recording of this presentation be made available? Yes, we will be posting both the recording, the slide deck, and the chat following this meeting. And then we will post the recordings for all of the other webinars as well.
Hi, Robin, do you want to address the opportunity for further engagement on the stakeholding process related to the fast track approval process? Looks like there's a question there about it.
Thanks. That is a great suggestion, Mo. So what we envision is a stakeholder process through the fall months of 2023, where we would have some local government representatives and some developers would sit down and talk through what some best practices are for achieving expedited development review. And again, that could look like something different in a large municipality versus a smaller jurisdiction. So we're really trying to get input on that process and then provide guidance for how does one document that? How does one prove that you've achieved your fast track? So if you are interested in being part of that stakeholder process, whether you're a local government or a developer, for-profit or nonprofit, please go ahead and reach out to me. I'll put my contact info in the chat. And then DOH, Division of Housing, and Division of Local Government will work together with those stakeholder groups to try and collectively develop some answers that are aligned with statute and that will work for jurisdictions and development partners.
Thanks, Robin. We did get a little bit more clarification from Mark on his question. And it says the 90 days is hard to achieve when state law requires 30 days prior to a public hearing from mineral rights owners. And Mark, I think what we'll do is that this question will probably, Mo responded. He said it's not clear on how the process for establishing mineral rights fits into the fast track approval process for an affordable housing development project. Please do participate in future discussions related to the development of the guidelines. So questions like this related to the fast track approval process will be coming about. And as Robin mentioned, DOLA will be doing their stakeholder engagement for that process this fall. So stay tuned for more guidance on this. And then there is, Robin just did drop her email in the chat for those who want to participate. That's all we have. So Sarah, I think we can go ahead.
Sounds great. So as we wrap up here, we'd like to leave you with some additional resources and opportunities for technical assistance. The Engage DOLA site is a great resource. It has education opportunities, including articles, frequently asked questions, and key dates. It also provides services such as submitting questions or links for commitment submission, which is coming soon, and opportunity for feedback, including comments and polls. And I believe that is in the chat. So engagedola.org/prop-123. Another resource is we will be doing technical assistance workshops following all of these webinars for the different size communities. And then those will be available by request. You can contact Andy or Robin for those, and those will be occurring probably actually starting this August and going into October and September. Are there any questions about the workshops or the availability of webinars? All right, thanks, Melissa. We can move on. We'd like to open it up to questions and answers. And as far as contacts go going forward, as questions arise, the key people that are available to you from the Department of Local Affairs Division of Housing, Mo and Connor both have been on this call today. From DOLA, we have Andy Hill, the Director of Community Development Office, and Robin, who's here today as well, the Program Assistant for Community Development Office. For CHAFA, Geraldine Francis, who was also with us today. And for the OEDIT programs, Hillary Cooper. And just the last slide is sort of a landing slide to keep these, well, hopefully we can put these all in the chat, but to keep these fresh in your mind, all the resources that are available. There's the DOLA Proposition 123 homepage, CHAFA OEDIT funding programs, the Department of Homelessness Support Programs, the Department of Local Government Local Planning Capacity Grant Program, the baseline reference table and the baseline assistance tool, as well as the commitment filing site, which Connor showed you today. And then, lastly, I think we'll go on to the next slide and open it up to questions. Anything that anyone has from what we've covered today? I don't see anything coming in, Melissa.
We have nothing in the chat and nothing in the Q&A, but folks, if you'd like to raise your hand and ask your question live, you are also more than welcome to do so.
And we are happy to stay on. If a few of us could stay on, if you have a burning question that might arise or may become burning question, But otherwise, we'd like to say thank you to everyone for participating. Our goal really is to enable all of you, if you choose to opt in, to have the resources available to do so. So thank you, everyone. And again, a few of us will stay on if people have questions that they think of later. It looks like, Melissa, there's a few. Are there? Oh, no, just thank yous.
Yep, they're all thank yous.
Those are good.
Thank you all for being here. We do appreciate it.
I think we can call this a wrap, folks. Great discussion.
Well, I'll go ahead and end I'll stop sharing my screen and end the recording, folks. If any of you staying on or that are still on do have any additional questions, feel free to shoot them over to either Connor or Robin or Mo, who dropped all of their emails in the chat, or reach out via the Engage DOLA website. There is an opportunity